aware of a few good horror films that may have scared us in the past. It's something that will never disappear because it will always innately exist to us. This may seem off the shelf, but stick with me. For those who are familiar with Plato's Republic, a pretty good analogy can be applied to this artistry, being the cave. In this analogy, which delves into Plato's theory of forms and the instigator of human knowledge, we have some prisoners chained up in a cave, all of whom are watching shadows on a wall. These shadows, cast by a lit fire, are the lesser forms of the objects they are replicating, and the objects, usually depicted as statues, are the lesser form of something that is more real. I like to link this analogy to art because art is just not as grounded as our everyday lives. That's not to say you can't make it grounded or add elements of hyperrealism, but there are opportunities to make it more surreal. Art in general is a grey area, where you can tamper with things. The creator is like a music conductor. They can pick the audience's emotions, they can choose how you feel, how you experience media, through all different forms and senses. I relate to the cave analogy because art is just a version of what we know to be real, and when it comes to horror, I don't think there's a better sense of a warped reality that you get when you read Junji Ito. Unfortunately, I took quite a backwards route in order to be introduced to Ito's works. I first heard of him when a horror anthology anime series came out in 2018. I ended up watching the Junji Ito Collection, and for the most part I found the concept really cool, but I think the execution was very off. It's clear to see that translating what Ito did in his manga to anime just wasn't it. It didn't work. I mean, episode 2 was okay, but other than that, it just didn't hit. And after watching it, it was really odd to me because I heard more about the author, Junji Ito, and how passionate he was that he was finally getting his horror manga translated into anime format, only for the reception to be quite negative. So I wanted to know what the deal was, and I certainly found out. A year ago, I actually ended up buying Uzumaki. I read it on the train to uni, ended up finishing it in one day, and then I read more stuff. I mean, I went to Tomy, smashed, deserted, and I should also point out that most of Ito's works are anthology series, which essentially means short stories placed together into a cohesive narrative. Sometimes it doesn't need to follow a narrative at all, and sometimes it is just random and based on thematics. But within this time of me reading, I really began to see just how much of a cultural phenomenon Junji Ito actually was. I mean, people started getting tattoos, I was seeing more merchandise, people were wearing clothes of manga panels. I mean, I saw badges, pins, people wearing bags based on his art style. A lot of people actually tried to replicate his own art style, and myself included after a while, and I just eventually found out I could not do it at all. But that's why I'm making this video. Why now has Junji Ito become such a large presence? There's no question that Ito is a fantastic artist. I mean, most mangakas out there have their own personal style and identities which really works for them. I mean, one of my favourites is the sadly late Kentaro Mura, the author of Berserk, who had beautiful imagery. However, what makes Ito so special is his temperament, specifically to the horror genre. Taking an inspiration from films such as Frankenstein, Dracula, and traditional Japanese rakugo, which would commonly delve into ghost stories, Ito found inspiration all around him, even in his old countryside home, which began to build concepts in his mind which would later become entire narratives. Having directed, shot, edited loads of short films, documentaries, and experimental work myself, I can really see the power that having a vision has. You know, having fundamental ideas and a theme within each thing you make is so imperative for an artist, because without which I feel like you'd just be running around in circles and making something for the sake of it, making horror for the sake of it being scary, without having any deeper understanding of the art form or meaning behind your work. This vision is what filmmakers know as authorship. It's the idea of having your identity placed onto the paper. And it's this power of identity which makes Junji's works so prevalent, because of how much inspiration he's taken from a young age. This is what makes Ito so unique in the art world. It's taking aspects from your own environment and turning them into stories. Within the art of Junji Ito, there is something captivating about how he manifests emotion in the characters. Though composition and blocking is vital to any art form, and a principle Ito adapts very well, the manga drawing style almost never accommodates the fine rules of human anatomy, and instead breaks the barriers between what we know as normal and what isn't. This breaking of barriers can create interesting results, which leads us into the uncanny valley, to the grotesque and surreal, which, when the elements of storytelling and timing come together, can be utterly terrifying, or just slightly uncomfortable. I mean, either way, if it sort of emits a certain negative emotion, it's doing its job because the game is horror after all. Ito utilises harsh lines to amplify the contrast within the panel, bringing our attention to the characters. Contrast is also vital to cinematography, but when you're working with a still image, or a reel of images, which is what we call animation, you need to be meticulous and handcraft each and every frame exactly how it needs to be. Ito exaggerates the emotion and the tone by the way he crafts the characters' eyes, their mouths, their entire bodies, all in order to exaggerate the mental state of our characters through visuals alone. When it comes to narrative, Ito's stories are of course bizarre, constantly tapping into the human psyche by any means necessary. But one particular aspect I've actually figured out is they all seem to relate to, in my opinion, greed. By having an individual or group of characters desire something, their insatiable want for something they shouldn't. Sometimes it may be played in reverse, for someone to be forcing what they want onto others, until the disease grows and manifests in a large group of people. For the most part, the people who take the greedy path usually get punished in a way, but they never necessarily lose. There is a question in the branch of utilitarianism which states, would you rather be a dissatisfied human or a satisfied pig? To which John Stuart Mill provided, it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And I find Ito touches upon this very thing, having a broken individual and an unbroken individual, and the essence of horror lies within the ethics. The choices the unbroken make. Do they help? Do they crave? Do they run? And the do is tension. But why is there a massive leap in popularity with Ito as opposed to other artists in the manga industry? To put it simply, Ito's own style and craftsmanship just perfectly accommodates the current media climate. Or more specifically the horror climate, because in the past few years we've seen a massive change in mainstream horror media, how it's presented and how it's consumed. When simplistic approaches were once dominant, they've now been moved aside for more complex alternatives. And when I say complex or varied, I don't necessarily mean things that haven't been done before, but rather done in a completely new and unique way, which explicits a certain emotion or thematic. Now, Ito comfortably fits into this auteur environment, and it's very similar to current filmmakers up and rising such as Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, Jordan Peele, who are all smashing it in their own respective dark style of genre. In the past, what may have been considered popular or funny or scary may just be now outdated, and, for certain aspects, some things should possibly stay dead. I think that would probably benefit everyone. But our constant need for innovation is inherent to us, and media needs to accommodate that, and this is why we're experiencing something called retrogression. The explosion of this Lovecraftian horror can be blamed on the one and only Stranger Things. The Duffer Brothers have successfully created one of the most marketable pieces of content ever put to screen since Star Wars and Harry Potter. I mean, they literally add merchandise to the story because they just know it will sell. From the revival of Stephen King's works, even to video games, our mainstream horror is extremely orientated to the work of old, to the supernatural and unknown. We are going back to our roots in order to take work from literature to refine and reinvent. The work of Junji Ito, alongside many darker works such as Berserk, have been drawn into this movement, popularised because there is a love for the macabre, and where there is love, there is a market. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, generating money for expressionist work is actually fantastic, but whereas movements in the past, such as German Expressionism, the French New Wave, or rebel filmmaking, they've all had a certain agenda, I feel like things may be a bit more artificial now. With the rise of streaming platforms, I can't help but feel things seem a little bit more manufactured, where we're starting to see things categorised under hashtags and the umbrella term we have all come to know as aesthetics. And businesses do need to make money, and so they are going to possibly capitalise on this opportunity. And there does need to be a balance between our own enjoyment and the economic side of things. There are benefits here and there, but I think I'd leave you with the idea that things are changing and things are transcending, but whether we're doing it for the artistic reasons or whether we're doing it for monetary reasons, that's up to you to decide. But for now, thank you very much for watching this video. I do really appreciate you staying around. If you like stuff like this, I'll be making more because I love this type of format. So yeah, please feel free to subscribe, and I shall see you later. Oh, and I do recommend you read some of Ito's works. Like, they are really good.